out after our time together today. Thank you for joining us today for our public presentation on the true cost of childcare in Erie County. Nyaweskeno Onodowaga ni a Agiswe Gayo. I'm Kirky Kazak. I'm Seneca Hot Clan in Polish, and I work on Buffalo Commons, which is the joint collaboration between Partnership for the Public Good, a community-based think tank here in Buffalo, New York, and our Cornell University ILR Buffalo Co-Lab, which you'll hear more about. It is our hope that throughout today's presentation, our sincere and utter appreciation for our childcare providers and workers comes through. Many of ourselves are or were working parents, and I personally know the amount of dedication and care that my daughter's daycare teachers take every day they're with her. Before we begin I want to acknowledge the celebration of Black History Month and the multitude of contributions, both recognized and all too often unrecognized, that our Black and African American brothers and sisters have had throughout history and in the work that we do. Finally, I want to begin with a territorial acknowledgement. In keeping with regional protocol, I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and by honoring the sovereignty of the Six Nations, Mohawk, Cuyuna, Onondaga, Oneida, Seneca, and Tuscarora, and their land where we are situated and where the majority of our work takes place. In this acknowledgement, we hope to demonstrate respect for the treaties that were made on these territories and any remorse for the harms and mistakes of the far recent past. We pledge to work towards partnership with a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. I'm just going to run through a couple of quick logistics. If you need closed captioning, there's a button at the bottom of your Zoom window labeled CC. Additionally, you'll see that there's an option for you to ask any questions at the bottom middle part of your Zoom screen labeled Q&A. Throughout the presentation, you'll be encouraged to ask questions, though we will save time at the end in order to lift them up to our panelists. As I mentioned earlier, the link to this recorded session, the report, and any materials that are mentioned will be provided in a follow-up email. So without further ado, I'll pass it to my colleague, Cathy Creighton, the director of our ILR Buffalo Co-Lab, to frame our time together. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ricky. That was a really great introduction. So welcome to our presentation of a childcare study that Cornell University's ILR office in Buffalo, the Buffalo Co-Lab, that we conducted in collaboration with Erie County, the New York State Legislature, and most importantly with the childcare community, that's activists and childcare providers. I'm just going to spend not very much time. We only have 1 hour together. So I'm going to just kind of run through what our program is. We are going to first hear from Deputy Erie County Executive Maria Whyte. She's going to frame the problem which led to this study. Then we're going to hear testimony from daycare providers from each of the different modalities of childcare. I'm going to present a highlight of the findings that Cornell University our study came to. And I want to acknowledge that I was the leader in our study is Lou Jean Flarin, who is part of this panel, and also our director of research, Dr. Rusty Weaver. Then we're going to have a Q&A, and Assemblymember Monica Wallace, who's been championing this issue in the state legislature, is going to join us at about 1:50 for the rest of our time. So without further ado, I'd like to turn this over to Deputy Erie County Executive Maria Whyte.
Thank you so much for that, Cathy, and welcome to all of you. Thank you for joining the presentation today. And on behalf of County Executive Poloncarz, I really want to extend our gratitude to Cornell University for the research that you have done on this very important topic, and our gratitude to the providers who have done tremendous work throughout the pandemic to keep the children and the families they serve front and center in their work. As Cathy indicated, it's my pleasure today to sort of help frame the problem, and I thought it would be wise to talk about it just from how Erie County became particularly involved. So early in the pandemic, County Executive Poloncarz impaneled the Emergency Child Care Task Force, and key issues regarding childcare were brought to the county's attention through the task force, which included dozens of different childcare providers and advocates. Chief among the problems that was brought to our attention was the significant difference between the child care subsidy rate set by OCFS and the actual cost of providing quality childcare. The fact that the subsidy rate is dramatically lower than the actual cost of care has contributed to extremely low wages for childcare workers, 98% or approximately 88% in Erie County of whom are women, and approximately 35% of whom are minority. This in turn has had the following serious negative ripple effects in our larger economy. And I'm not sure, Cricky, if you are able to share the domino diagram. Yes, thank you. So we have extremely low wages combined with hazardous and working conditions and the increased risk of COVID exposure in childcare settings that have made it nearly impossible for childcare providers to hire new childcare workers. So then we have seen through the course of the study that there is a childcare worker shortage, and childcare workers are leaving the industry in droves. And with a shortage of childcare workers, childcare providers cannot keep up with the demand and have fewer childcare spots to offer. Additionally, many childcare providers have had to decrease capacity in order to ensure social distancing among non-vaccinated children, further limiting the number of available childcare spots. And still other childcare centers have closed completely during the pandemic as they were unable to weather the financial hardship caused by the pandemic. So then we see that creates, with fewer spots for childcare for working families, we see that means that millions of women nationwide have had to drop out of the workforce. And then we see employers nationwide reporting that one reason they are having a difficult time hiring workers is because of the lack of childcare. And although I don't have it handy to share with you at the moment, the Buffalo Niagara Partnership just in January released their 2022 advocacy agenda for businesses, and included among their top priorities for the business community they serve was increased access to affordable childcare for families, because they know that without affordable childcare, the workforce that's needed to help grow our economy and grow our local businesses is unavailable. So it remains a top priority for the business community. Meanwhile, then, the cost of childcare has gone up since demand is outpacing supply, but the quality of childcare we are aware is at risk because the childcare providers are unable to recruit because of the extremely low wages, unable to recruit the childcare workforce that's needed to maintain quality service. So this is the problem that Erie County was exploring through the course of our emergency childcare task force. And it became very obvious to us that it was necessary to explore this issue with real facts and figures. And as a consequence of that, Erie County reached out to Cornell University, who had previously conducted a study in 2006 about childcare called "Childcare Means Business," and through that partnership, along with a partnership including Assemblymember Monica Wallace, who has been a tremendous leader on this issue locally here in Western New York. This study was born, and it is now a wonderful opportunity to share the consequences of this study and what we are hoping can be our next steps. So with that, Cathy, I hope that I have sort of framed the problem and framed Erie County's interest in the problem, and I'll look forward to the presentations from our other panelists and our Q&A today.
Thank you so much, Deputy County Executive Maria Whyte. And thank you so much, Maria, for your leadership in the Emergency Child Care Task Force and all the work that you've been doing. And it's been a pleasure to work on this study with you and with the other participants. Okay, so we had over 150 people register for this, and we have almost 90 people on. So that's quite 84 people on, which is quite good for one of these presentations. So I'm happy that you're all here. We thought when we were putting this together that what was most important was to hear from the providers themselves, because they really have informed all of our research. So before we talk about what we found, we wanted to make sure you heard from the different modalities of childcare. Vanetta, is Veldina on this call? I don't see her name. We're going to go to Carmen. Carmen works in a group family daycare called Yolanda's Kids Paradise Daycare. Carmen, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Mhm.
My name is Carmen Lupianes. I'm the owner of Yolanda Kids Paradise Care Group Family Care. I've been a child care provider for 19 years. My hours of operation are Monday to Friday, 6 to 7, all year around. About 75 of my parents receive subsidized. It has been extremely challenging to keep my daycare open. The minimum wage rise. I had to pay more in staff salary. The pandemic has increased the portion of health, safety, and cleaning supplies, and also PPE. It also has decreased enrollment because more parents are working from home or have decided the workforce all together. At the same time, food, insurance, utility bills, and regular maintenance and repairs also continue to increase. The county no longer provide COVID-19 subsidy waiver to cover absence due to quarantine. I had to keep my school-age children longer in the morning and evening because the school buses have been picking up and dropping off very late. Parents cannot afford to pay for those extra hours, and DSS doesn't cover it. My daycare fees are set at the market rate to keep child care affordable. However, the market rate for 3 and 4 years old children, for example, is $38 per day, maximum 9 hours or 10. I still have kids for 10 hours, and it's the same $30 per day, which is really only like $4.22 per hour. This is not enough to operate daycare. What business or school can survive on $4 per hour? How can I take care of children every day with only $4 per hour? How can I pay my staff minimum wage of $13.20 per hour per day with that same $4 per hour? The market rate is extremely decisive and does not represent what it truly takes to operate a daycare. We need to use the cost of care now to keep children care open and available for children, families, and our workforce. And I also want to talk about the kids. Like today, they're remote. They've been paying the same kind of money for those kids, and we have to give you papers, electricity, Wi-Fi, pencils, crayons, and that's not how we get the same money like for the other ones. And I think that's not fair.
Thank you so much for sharing, Carmen.
And I'm sorry about my accent, but I'm trying.
Yeah, no, never apologize for your accent, which is beautiful. We're going to next here, you'll see, Carmen, that our results from our study just align perfectly with what you just explained here today. And we're looking for Veldina from Upsadaisy Family Daycare. Veldina? I think she needs to be unmuted. I'm not sure.
Yep, we've asked her to unmute.
Okay. Veldina? One thing about having providers speak is that they're very busy and cannot often get off the phone, get onto the program. Let's go to Franketta Willoughby from Franketta Willoughby Daycare. Franketta, can you unmute yourself, Franketta? Franketta, you need to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
Now we can hear you.
Okay,
so
awesome. Sorry
so
about
much,
that.
Franketta.
My name is Franketta Willoughby. I have been a legally exempt childcare provider since 2015. I love providing a safe, fun learning environment while providing quality childcare to children. Although I love what I do, there are some challenges that I have faced and is currently facing. One, such as low wages. The amount of subsidy that is allowed to be paid out simply does not cover the cost of care and the essentials needed to run the business, which creates individuals such as myself not able to make profit for business. I have provided care for newborns, and the hourly rate has always been lower than the average minimum wage for an average worker. Two, there is also a small gap of children allowed in care, which results in not enough hours allowed for children allowed in care at the time. Not only does this affect providers, but this definitely affects parents and the longevity of occupations or simply maintaining jobs. These challenges hinders my business and its potential to serve more children and upscale. The pandemic has definitely impacted my business negatively, from being shut down and then not having working capital, but still having to maintain the business for when operation opens back up. I love the bonds that I have created with the children throughout the years and the parents, and I love serving my community, but I am not sure how long I will be able to take on this responsibility, and definitely if situations don't change. Situations have to change in order for me to stay in business. I love what I do again, and I love connecting with parents and children. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Franketta, so much for your testimony and for the work that you're doing. Let's go to Alyssa Schreiber Mullen. She's the operations manager for Imagination Station Child Care Center.
Hi, thank you. I am going to be reading on behalf of Kelly Crombeck, our owner today. So here is what she has written, and I feel the same way as her. It says, hello, my name is Kelly Crombeck, and I'm the president and owner of Imagination Station Childcare and Preschool. I started in this field over 15 years ago because I have a love for early childhood education and understand the importance of providing high quality, educationally based care to children very early on. My company has 7 locations between Buffalo and Rochester, and we service over 800 families weekly. The last 2 years have been a complete struggle for us, and we faced challenges we never could have imagined. Our industry is in dire need of help. We're facing great financial challenges. The stabilization grants were helpful, but short-term funding can't solve long-term problems. New York State continues to raise minimum wage, yet childcare subsidy rates are not increasing at the same rate. Subsidy does not cover the full cost of care, nor does it compensate providers for 100% of absences, which is a great loss to providers as those days goes unpaid. The last 2 years, operating expenses have increased 5 to 6% each year. Yet we haven't seen revenue increases at this rate because we simply can't raise rates fast enough to keep up with inflation and minimum wage, nor can families afford it. Another issue we're facing is the great staffing crisis across our nation. This has created huge burdens on business owners as we've had to offer sign-on bonuses, increased wages, monthly bonuses, and even additional fringe benefits. This is not sustainable in an industry with such high costs and limited resources. Even with offering these additional benefits, we still can't recruit candidates. Positions can be posted for months and not a single applicant. Trying to get qualified candidates to run a classroom is next to impossible because people are fleeing our industry due to limited wages. We just hope and pray that the small bonuses we are offering keep the ones we have. Sadly, we find that's not working. This staffing crisis has caused centers to close classrooms, limit enrollment, and even shut down completely. I personally take it week by week as I'm unsure if I'll be able to staff my centers next week. My greatest fear is having to pick which room I have to shut down and what parents I'm going to have to call to say, sorry, you can't come on Monday. These financial problems, coupled with our highly regulated industry, make operating a childcare center successfully extremely difficult. New York State OCFS needs to reevaluate regulations that work against providers. Our ratio requirements should be reviewed as it has potential to help with staffing needs. We need to stop the masking requirement for young children as it would alleviate some of the stress on our already burnt out teachers. And we need to reevaluate the extensive requirements to work in the field so the few candidates we do have actually complete the process and start working. Overall, there are many barriers facing providers at this time. Funding, resources, and overall support are needed from the state and governing agencies in order for centers to be successful. I have great passion and love for this field, and I truly hope these issues are brought to light and addressed immediately so providers can continue to do what they do best and not worry about closing their doors tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alyssa, and thank you for stepping in for your colleague. Let's go to Carrie Joe Cleary, who is with a child care center, Ripon with us. Thanks, Carrie
Hi.
Joe, for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. My name is Carrie Joe Cleary, and I'm the education coordinator at Ripon with Us Child Care Center. I've been asked to talk about the school age program that we also offer here at our center. We've been servicing families for the past 47 years. And the reason that I'm so passionate about this field is because I've grown up here. When we opened our doors in 1974, I attended. And I was in our after school program then. And I remember coming in and playing games and winning prizes, running around, having fun like kids do. And the after school program that we have here at our center is it's a huge asset to our families because that means they can keep all of their kids together in one facility. I have 3 staff members now who work for me, who currently attended our program, who grew up here. And they say the reason they wanted to come back was because all the time they spent with us during holidays, days off, and summer camp were the most impactful. And they wanted to come back and share that with the generation of kids to come. But challenges that we're facing today are the same that everyone's mentioned, obviously with the low subsidies, low pay. I mean, that is the hugest thing right now. I'm not able to hire a separate coordinator to oversee the program. So my lead teacher is wearing both hats. You know, she's a teacher for the school agers, plus she's trying to run the program. She, you know, when problems come up, she's the one that has to face them. She's been here for almost 20 years and literally makes $1 over minimum wage. Trying to recruit for school age today is almost impossible. Recruiting for early childhood in general is hard, but the school age portion of it, that person has to be extra enthusiastic. They have to be physical. They have to do sports activities. They have to be creative. They have to plan for days off. They have to do a lot more. And also now with COVID happening, they have to navigate through school tablets and they have to get kids right on when they have to be on. Today, I have one down there with 10 kids and she's down there by herself, getting them online, getting them into work, getting them to class. It's a lot. She makes minimum wage. Our school age program only has 14 kids right now. In our heyday, we had 45 to 50. We can't take more kids right now. Subsidies for school age have not been raised in years. They don't cover transportation costs. We do provide transportation to some of our kids. We drive them to school and pick them up. And also this year with the problems in Buffalo, some kids' buses don't even show up. So guess who's driving them? My school age staff. But that's not reimbursed either. They have done so much with the kids and they have very little pay. They have no benefits, very little recognition. I try to pull from my childcare side to fill in on the school age side, but it's very difficult to try and get someone to go over there. Sometimes the situations that come up in the school age wing are much more challenging than you could even imagine. I mean, sometimes I think we need a social worker here on site. And it's true, our program has suffered greatly over the last 2 years. Even if I wanted to start rebuilding, I don't know how I would do that. Most of the kids who come to work for us are college kids and it's a part-time job, but without competitive wages and benefits, we lose some really good people. I've had a lot of people come work for me in my summer camp and school age program who are going on to become teachers. And well, once they're teachers, they're not here anymore with us. So in close, I just want you to consider this. Wouldn't it be awesome if we could pay more and provide benefits and keep these school age staffers employed long-term? Because how much of an impact would that have on our the children that we serve, their lives? It would be very impactful and it would mean a lot. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Carrie Joe. I'm just so moved by the fact that you are now teaching where you yourself were a child. That is incredibly moving, and that you have 3 other people who are the same.
And I taught them, so it's awesome to me too. I love that they came back. Yeah.
Well, your passion really shows through.
Thank you.
Does Ruth want to speak? Ruth Cleary?
No.
No.
I can tell you she does not. She left it up to me. So.
All right. I'm not sure if we were missing one person who was muted. Did we get to Veldina?
We've asked to unmute, but I think they might have some issues with their phone right now unmuting.
Okay. So I'm also having some internet. I don't know if it's any better. I moved spots to be right next to the modem. So do we have, Cricky, do we have any questions at this point? We haven't gone through the findings yet, but does anyone have any questions they want to ask directly of the providers?
We have some questions, but we haven't had any from that will go directly to the providers. So I think we can move to the finding sections.
Okay, great. I'm going to share my screen. I need just to have the share screen access, please, Cricky. Hang on while we go through this technical difficulty. So while we're doing that, I just want to say that this childcare study stands on the back of the childcare study that Eugene Flaron did back in 2006 with many other childcare advocates and the business community. And we can also share that finding with you from 2006. So here we go. If someone can give me, Carrie Joe, can you give me a thumbs up if you can see this fine? Okay, great. So this is as Maria Whyte said, we were approached, Cornell University, the Buffalo Co-Lab has been working in Buffalo now. We're on our 76th year. And we were approached to do a study on what is the true cost of childcare. This is phase 1. We're going to do another portion of the study, but this is phase 1 where we just tried to quickly get to this because the state budget is coming up. What is the true cost of childcare? The project goal was to compare the OCFS market rate, which those of you who are in the business know what the OCFS market rate cost was, and compare that with what is the true cost of childcare, and is there a difference between the two? Is it enough money for you childcare providers to provide childcare to the children that are in your care? We did a professional online survey. We surveyed all 500 Erie County providers. We did focus groups by modality. We looked at economic and geographic data that was available. We met regularly with the steering committee, and we had an advisory committee that helped us through this entire process. So you can see from this map that these are all of the licensed childcare providers. Sorry, Frankita. These are the licensed childcare providers, 499 of them in Erie County. The purple are those who answered the survey, and we had quite a good survey response, 46.9%, 47%, almost half of survey respondents responded to the survey. And you can also see in this map that the respondents covered all the areas of Erie County, including rural areas, suburban areas, and the city of Buffalo. What we found is that the child care workforce is shrunk dramatically, and it continues to shrink. So this contraction happened before the pandemic, from 2019 until 2020, which is the most recent data that we could have. Erie lost 11% of its child care workforce. So you all that are talking today, you know this, you're living with this, but now you have a number to show this. And when the new data is released, we will be able to show, we think there probably are further declines. So this is the lowest value in the 11-year period for which this data is available. Who are these child care workers in Erie County? You can see that the child care workers are predominantly or disproportionately people of color as compared to all workers in the county of Erie. You can also see here that a large majority of the workforce is female. Whereas women make up 49% of Erie County's workforce, in childcare workers, they make up 88% of the childcare workforce. So we have a woman, a people of color and women workforce in the childcare industry. According to our analysis, the median effective hourly rate, this is for self-reported data from our survey, that the childcare workforce is making about $10.38 an hour, which is less than the minimum wage. And considerably less than what MIT wage calculator defines as a living wage. So we have quite a low wage workforce. We also find that the workforce does not generally receive health insurance. Erie County, 75% of workers have employer-based health insurance. In childcare, that is only 46%. So less than half of childcare workers receive employer health coverage when they work. We asked the question of whether childcare providers make enough money to offer the level and the quality of services they wish to provide. And 70% of childcare workers said that they do not make enough money to offer the services they want to provide. For those providers who accept subsidy children, that number jumps to over 80%. So 80% of the providers who accept subsidy say that they are not receiving enough money to run their business. And here we have that the facilities that are serving the most disempowered children are themselves the most financially disempowered. The one interesting thing that we found was that that childcare providers who accept subsidy have more room to expand their businesses and have a greater desire to expand the services that they are offering. And you heard that in the testimony just before me of providers who can't find workers, so they can't staff their facility. So it's not a matter always of a childcare desert, so to speak. It's a matter of the fact that there are spaces. As Carrie Joe said, they were at 45 spots and now they have much less than that enrolled. Our survey asked childcare providers, if you had more money, rank what you would spend the money on. And the number one priority for all childcare providers overwhelmingly was that childcare providers, if they had the money, they would increase the wages and benefits of their staff. And second is related to that is that they would hire more staff. And then the third was that they would renovate their existing space or create a larger space. This comes to the crux, this slide, and you can see that I'm kind of skipping through some of the slides because we don't have enough time, but I wanted to get to where we were looking for what is actually the gap between what it costs to run the childcare versus what the childcare providers are receiving. And you can see in this slide that for childcare centers and after-school centers, the typical weekly gap per child is $53 a week, excuse me, which approximates to $230 a month and then $2,700 per year, over $2,700 per year. So that is the gap there where is falling short, that the subsidy the childcare providers receive is short that much money in paying for the current expenses that childcare providers have. For family daycare and group family daycare, that amount was much larger, $107 a week or $5,500 per child per year. We believe that that gap is primarily why that is so much bigger is that the in-home daycare providers spend much more time working without being paid for time they're not watching children in their home. We believe that's what accounts for that discrepancy. What we also did was that because the number one priority for all daycare providers was raising staff wages, what would that, if we increased wages, what would the subsidy rate need to be to pay for that? So what we did was we looked at, for childcare providers, what are similar professions that would equate to what childcare providers are credentialed at? What would they earn? What do they earn? And generally they earn over $25 an hour. So what we did was we acted conservatively and we took a full-time hourly rate of $25 an hour and a part-time rate of $20 an hour. And if childcare providers were paid, childcare employees were paid $25 an hour, then what we see is a much greater gap. So we would see that for daycare centers and after school, that's $141 a gap per child per week, and $240 for home daycare. So this is the gap between the current subsidy rate and what it would cost if we paid $25 an hour for full-time, $20 for part-time. It would be $7,300 per child per year, or for home daycare, $12,480 per year. So you see this is a substantial gap. We also conducted focus groups in each modality, and I just want to go through what some of the concerns were that were raised in the focus groups. For group family daycare and family daycare, providers are on average working 25 hours a week, which is not compensated. That was one big takeaway. Another big takeaway is that when a child is receiving a subsidy, the provider is paid on attendance versus enrollment. And that is costing providers a lot because they still have to pay their utility, they still have to pay their rent or their mortgage, and yet here they are not being paid if a child doesn't show up. There's also an 8-week gap in not being paid for subsidy, and that is also a big problem in the industry. Similar for the food subsidy. The food subsidy is not sufficient to pay for feeding children a healthy and fresh meal. Inflation has worsened this problem, and this is also exacerbated on that you have to buy food, but then if the child doesn't come to the daycare, then the provider is not reimbursed for the food that was just bought for this child. So these are big problems. I just want to note that one provider said that she takes money out of her own pocket to pay for a healthier meal. And other people told her that she wouldn't be able to stay in business if that was her inclination. Providers said they spend a great deal of time performing administrative functions like record keeping to OCFS, and they're not paid for that time. School age and some centers are applying for numerous grants, and they have to do grant maintenance that takes them out of the classroom and into the office to work on paperwork, extensive paperwork. There is unanimous consensus that there's insufficient funding for capital improvements. Many people want to expand their business or to put in playground equipment, and they simply don't have the money to meet that. And their infrastructure is crumbling, just like the childcare industry is crumbling. Insurance ranks as one of the most commonly, most costly items for childcare. And each person is on their own to go and search for insurance each year to find the best they can do. So these are the studies that, these are the highlights of the study that we had.
Thank you, Cathy. We were able to be joined by Veldina if we wanted to give her the opportunity to share a little bit.
That would be wonderful. Veldina, are you there? If you could unmute yourself, Veldina.
Unmute. Can you hear me?
Yes, we
Okay.
can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, and so my name is Veldina. I'm a provider at Upsy Daisy Daycare. I'm located on Florida Street in the city of Buffalo. My passion for childcare started at a very, very early age. I enjoyed taking care of my siblings and got pretty good at meeting their needs. So it is not surprising that the majority of the jobs I've worked over the years involve working with children. I worked at daycares, after school programs, group homes. I volunteered at Big Brother, Big Sister. I even worked for Child Protective Services for a couple of years. I gravitate towards this field. Working with children and families gives me purpose. The challenges I face right now in childcare is the lack of enrollment. To be frank, no enrollment at all, which makes it difficult for me to pay my bills. If I can't afford to pay my gas and lights and things, I am forced to close my doors, which would be devastating because I worked really hard to start this business, to just have to walk away from it because I can't secure enrollment. My challenge is when it comes to subsidies, when I did have children enrolled, the money just didn't cover my monthly expenses. My business hasn't gotten to the point where I would need to hire an assistant. But if that was the case, I wouldn't be able to pay a decent rate due to the funding that the county allows. The ends just won't meet. As far as the challenges due to the pandemic, for me, enrollment was an issue before the pandemic, and it just got worse after it hit. Absolutely no one was calling for daycare. And even now, I have no children enrolled in my daycare. And that's been since May, 10 months of unemployment. So my business is struggling, right? That's clear, but I'm still hopeful. I know that there's families out there in my community that are in need of quality care. And I know that I can be of some service if I got the proper support. That support would be a family recruitment service that actually works. And lastly, an increase in subsidized dollars. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Veldina.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much, Veldina. Yeah. Passion for watching for the work that the childcare providers do every day in teaching our children. And they don't want to leave the childcare industry. They want to stay in the childcare industry, but it is becoming increasingly difficult. Craigie, were there any questions?
And I just wanted to encourage folks, I know we had a couple pop up in the Q&A. So if you do have questions, these are the findings that we have for right now. There will be a phase 2 for this, but feel encouraged to put your questions and answers into the Q&A at the bottom. We had a couple of questions come in ahead of time via email, so I'll read through some of those. They might not relate directly to some of the findings, but some folks might be able to help answer this. One question is, could the county consider a universal sign-on for substitute teachers, like preparing a sub list for a grouping of centers in a particular area of the county?
Maria, I think that is a question for you.
Sure, that's a very interesting prospect, Craigie. I appreciate your sharing that question with me. That's not something I have an answer to now, but I would definitely be willing to talk that over with our Erie County Commissioner for the Department of Social Services and see if that isn't, you know, I guess what I've learned from a good participating in this experience is there are some problems that we need to solve by addressing it with greater resources and actually increasing the amount of money that is available in the child care subsidy. But there are other problems that we might be able to solve with greater collaboration that don't necessarily come down to resources. And this might be an example of one of those types of things. Another example of that might be, you know, working with New York State to form a cooperative of child care centers that would allow them for a cheaper purchase of insurance expenses, since that was identified as an expense that they use, or cheaper purchase of food, you know, through a cooperative and joint kind of bulk model collaborative approach. And to the extent that local government can participate in those kinds of solutions, even when they don't require local resources, you know, that's something that we should consider. So I appreciate that question, Craigie. If you would email that question for me so I can forward it to our Department of Social Services, the county can definitely look into it.
Absolutely. There's a couple other questions related to sort of those policy rather than more resource, but I'll jump to some of the ones that folks who are on the call right now are asking. One does relate to those resources. So Laura asked, can you talk a little about the cost of high quality care and review how you came to the $20 and $25 an hour rate? Is that the benchmark of cost for quality? And so I think this might be for Cathy or Rusty or Lugene.
Rusty, you might be a good person to answer it if you're there.
Sure.
So this is Dr. Rusty Weaver. He worked extensively on the report with me and Lugene. Thanks, Rusty.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'll keep my camera off because I'm doing some childcare of my own right now. But as for those numbers, so the Bureau of Labor Statistics every year does a survey of employers. It's a national survey, so it's not grounded down to our local or regional level, but it does show by industry and broken down pretty finely by industry what employers are paying their employees every year. So it allows us to take this annual temperature snapshot. And in the health and educational services industry, the average wage for full-time work was about $27 and some change. And for part-time work, it was closer to $20. And so we use those as benchmarks and just evened that out and then compared them to what the folks at MIT and their living wage calculator have for a living wage in Erie County. For a single person with no children, the MIT wage is $14.59, but as your household circumstances change, that goes up to between $22 and $25 or even in some cases $27 per hour. So we kind of picked those numbers based on those data points and converging them to just rest at relatively even numbers of $25 per hour for full-time work, $20 per hour for part-time work. And then an extra measure on that, so the Center for American Progress also puts out policy proposals for what it would take to increase the quality of care. One of their proposals is to lock childcare provider pay rates at the same as kindergarten teachers in the local region. Now, unfortunately, kindergarten teachers and elementary educators in our region are also underpaid, a lot of the data show. And so we didn't use that particular provision. Instead, we went with that sort of overall, what is it, across the nation, the average wage in this industry.
Thank you, Rusty. We've been joined by Assemblymember Monica Wallace. Maria, do you want to introduce Monica and how it was you and Monica who got started on this project?
Sure. Thank you so much for that opportunity, Cathy. It's my pleasure to introduce Assemblymember Monica Wallace. And I'll say that, as the pandemic was unfolding, she joined with Assemblymember Karen McMahon and hosted a press conference in her district at a child care center in her district to talk about the issues so many working families in her community were facing relative to the child care crisis, and talked about how the state would be using some of the resources provided by the federal government to alleviate the crunch among so many of the providers were experiencing as a result of the pandemic. And during those discussions, Assemblymember Wallace had just tremendous interest in the challenges that were being faced by the community and the providers in particular. Erie County, of course, had convened the Emergency Child Care Task Force and was likewise hearing so many of these challenges. And it was through that those conversations that unfolded as a consequence of the Assemblywoman's leadership that we were able to partner on the need for this study to really identify, well, what actually is the delta between the actual cost of care and the market rate that the state currently pays, and what would it take in order to change that? And as a consequence of that, this study was born, and now we have a great champion in Assemblymember Wallace with her leadership on trying to take this research now and do something with it and take the next step. So we are thrilled to be joined by the Assemblywoman, and would you please all join me in giving her a round of applause?
Thank you so much, Deputy Executive. I just want to say thank you so much for inviting me to say a few words, and really cannot say enough about how incredibly important and well-timed the research was by Erie County and by Cornell, how insightful it was to create this study, and how helpful that study is going to be to me and my fellow colleagues in the legislature to say, like, we've known all along that the industry is in crisis, and we've known all along that there's a disconnect between, the amount of money that they can charge people who are really struggling to get by and the amount of money they're getting back from DSS and how much they can pay their workers. It's a flawed model. And now we have the data to say, okay, here's why it is flawed. Here's what are some of the cost drivers that are really creating pressure on the industry, and how can we work to alleviate these pressures? Obviously, trying to get more money to support childcare has always been a priority, but now we have the data to say, okay, here's why we need it and how we can use it. The one thing I want to say that I'm not sure, we've been talking about the difference between the cost of enrollment and the cost of attendance. And I know that that has been one of the things that you identified in your study, is that, so just like I can say, I go to a gym, I belong to a gym, I should say, I don't often go to the gym. So if we were to charge by attendance, it would be a lot per, but because they can count on that every month being by enrollment, it creates certainty, and they still have the expenses of hiring people, of cleaning products and whatever else, just like you have the expenses of the costs of food, you have the expenses of the cost of the daycare providers that you hire to be there, your heating costs are still the same. So we actually did pass in the budget last year a law that would say each DSS recipient can have up to 24 excused absences. So I think that's going to help create some relief But obviously, as the study showed, there's a lot more work to be done. So I'm really grateful to both Erie County under the leadership of Maria Whyte, and also the Cornell School under the leadership of Lugene and Cathy and Creighton. Now that you have, and Rusty, of course, now that we have this information and we can say, okay, here's what we know, and maybe here's ways that we can try to move forward and make an argument for more investment in childcare. And one of the things we're also trying to do, and I'm sure you probably mentioned this before, is talk about how childcare is an economic development tool, right? All we keep hearing about, and we heard about all summer long, was if people didn't get that extra $300 unemployment check, they'd all go back to work. Well, guess what? That stopped, and we still have all these vacancies. And why do we have all these vacancies? Maybe one of the drivers is because 8 million women in the United States have left the workforce, and they're not coming back if they don't have adequate childcare. So these are all the things we need to be talking about. I thank you so much for giving me a few minutes to talk to you today. I have to go hop on another Zoom, but thank you. And I really appreciate this extensive, thoughtful report, which I understand is phase 1. There's more to come, but at least we're armed with a lot of information, and we are organizing in the Assembly to try to make arguments for more money. So keep your fingers crossed on that one.
Thank you so much, Assemblymember Wallace, for all your support, and go get them in Albany. Thanks for your hard work. I know this is a tough season during the budget season.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. Creighton, should we move to a couple more questions? We have about 3 minutes.
Yep, we have a more philosophical one that I'll save till the end, just to get everyone's sort of final thoughts on that. We have a couple more that relate directly to policies. I'll put them at the same time. Number 1, could a collection of data be conducted of colleges offering early childhood programs to learn more about their enrollment and folks who are early childhood majors over the past few years? Could a policy be adapted or adopted to target some of those people to try to help increase the number of folks who are able to provide childcare? And then the other one is around issuing. Is it possible to expand the pool of majors or acceptable folks who could be lead teachers, OTA and PTA graduates, which I apologize, I'm not familiar with what those stand for, but who are licensed and could offer sort of double duty for the classroom and the center?
So some of those questions involve maybe easing some of the regulations so that we could possibly get more providers. But what our study found is that there are plenty of people who are willing to be providers, and that the problem doesn't lie there. The problem lies is that they are being forced, despite their passion for their career, they're being forced to leave the industry because the wage is inadequate. And part of the reason the wage is inadequate, part of the reason, not the whole reason, of course, but part of the reason the wage is inadequate is that the subsidy rate that is set by the state is too low. So even if we tried to prompt more people to enter the industry, they are leaving to go work at Delta Sonic or fast food restaurants, not because they want to, but simply because they can't afford not to. So these are some of the things we're looking at. And some of those regulations is not part of this study. We do have certain things that we're going to put in the next phase 2 of the study. Martha Robertson in the chat said that Tompkins County, Martha Robertson was a legislator in the Tompkins County legislature, recently retired from her position, that Tompkins County has a healthcare insurance consortium allowing municipalities to buy bulk for insurance. And so that's where sharing this data and providing insights into our phase 2 of the study would be areas that we could provide assistance to childcare providers by suggesting policy changes such as like or this bulk buying. I'm going to see if my internet is better with me. Sorry, any other questions, Creighton?
Yep, we do have one more. I know we're at time, so I appreciate everyone who has taken the time to join us today. We will get this one last question though, but just before those who had joined us popped off, if you hadn't participated in the study, or if you do have any additional thoughts or questions, you are more than encouraged to email us, and we love your participation in part 2 as well. So the last one is a big question. So I'll pitch it to anyone who would like to jump in. We keep hearing business come up. I wonder if in like healthcare, we really need to get the business out of childcare. Love to hear any thoughts about how to do this better or how to get this more as a public service rather than a business.
I'll take a stab at answering that, Cricky. I think that's a wonderful question. And really, the New York Times podcast called The Daily did a pretty in-depth dive into precisely that question a number of months ago. And what they really found in their analysis is that as a business, the market of childcare is not solving the problems in the industry. So in other words, it can't totally be solved just with market forces. And as a result, when you have an industry like that, it really does, as a consequence, yield the justification for more government intervention. And the Build Back Better legislation, as many of you likely know, in fact, approached childcare in a much different way by actually capping family expenses at 7% of their income and setting standards for teacher wages that were more in line with elementary school teacher wages, and aimed to resolve the challenge of childcare precisely posed by this question, that it wasn't really just able to be solved as a business model, and instead required more government intervention and financial support from the government. You know that if we were to raise wages, Cricky, for all of these workers, but then simultaneously increased the charge to parents, that we would that the industry would also likewise collapse. So it's not something that can be solved with market forces, and the question suggests precisely that.
That's a wonderful way to end. Crick, you want to take us out?
Yep, I just wanted to thank everyone for joining us today. I know some folks had to pop off, but as I mentioned at the beginning, link to this recording will be sent to anyone who is registered. You're welcome to share it with anyone as well. We also have the report that Deputy County Executive referenced, but from the Buffalo Niagara Partnership. There's a 2006 study that will be released as well. This study, and then we'll provide a link to the daily podcast that was just referenced as well. If you have any questions, or if you really would like to participate in phase 2 of this, we would love to hear from you. So I will put buffalocommons@cornell.edu, or you're welcome to reply to the information that was provided to you when you registered. Otherwise, thank you again for joining us today. Thank you to Erie County. Thank you to Cornell ILR Buffalo Co-Lab. And thank you to all of you who are doing the real work every day.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.